Well, to the Canada-U.S. trade story now, and Canada's trade team is wrapping up 2 days of meetings in Washington as the clock is ticking on U.S. President Donald Trump's threat to increase tariffs on Canada come August 1st.
It's important for us to recognize that there is a time when the deal is the right deal, and it's important for us to be in a position to continue negotiating until we get to that point.
The CBC's Katie Simpson joins us now. So, Katie, some very familiar faces popping up there in Washington. What's the latest from what the ambassador and the minister had to say?
Yeah, this is 2 days of meeting trying to target people within the Trump administration as well as those who are close to Donald Trump. So today there were meetings with U.S. senators, Republican senators, yesterday and today. People like Tim Scott, who is a Republican senator from South Carolina. He was actually just at a major photo op event with Donald Trump just a few moments ago. And other Republicans who, again, are close to Donald Trump, who have his here, but also might have a better understanding of what the Trump administration is thinking and feeling and where they want to go next. Dominic, LeBlanc also having meetings with Howard Lutnick, who, of course, is leading the negotiations on the U.S. side. But when it comes to, Canadian businesses, Canadian workers who are looking in this moment, is there something new? Is there something that's moving? Have a listen to what we heard from Dominic LeBlanc, who, of course, is leading this from the Canadian side.
We're going to continue to do the difficult work and take the time necessary until the Prime Minister decides that the deal that's on the table is the best deal we can get. So we've made progress, but we have a lot of work in front of us.
So that's not exactly an optimistic take on whether a breakthrough is sort of here in this moment. There certainly isn't one at this moment, or one there could be one before this new deadline of August 1st. Now, this is part of the broader Canada strategy here, trying to sort of push the Canadian case with influential lawmakers, push the Canadian case with decision makers in the White House, and again, try to learn more about what it is the American wants. Throughout this entire process, we've seen Donald Trump and his team sort of change the goalposts, move the goalposts about what it is that they want from Canada, making this entire negotiation even more complex and more difficult and complicated for the Canadian side. Republicans are recognizing this. When you talk to the Canadian officials who are having these conversations, you hear that there's plenty of support from Republicans, from American lawmakers, both Democrat and Republicans, but at the same time trying to get Trump to sort of change his position or to be more lenient when it comes to Canada. That's not something that is really happening. And there is a recognition among American lawmakers that Canada is really facing an uphill battle. Have a listen to Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski.
I wish that I could say it feels good that this is all going to be taken care of before the 1st of August, but I'm not sensing that.
So really, for any Canadian workers, Canadian business leaders, any Canadians who are making decisions based on where this trading relationship is going, is there something brand new in this moment that changes the equation in terms of where things are going? No. Are the conversations still ongoing? Is the situation still incredibly fluid? Yes.
Okay, so Katie, fluid, but at a standstill at the same time is a remarkable thing about these trade talks. And then we're seeing in parallel, though Japan is now disagreeing with some of the details, Trump is making some other deals. So what do you make of that? Where do things stand?
Yeah, the thing that I think Canadians at this point, particularly people who will be watching this program, is that until the actual deal is on paper and you can see the exact terms of what's actually included, you can't really count on anything being final. Much of what we know about the Japanese deal so far has been shaped by what Donald Trump has said on social media and what some of his cabinet secretaries have said in interviews. And so Trump appears, at least in this moment, to be in a deal-making mood, announcing the deal with Japan, or the framework for a deal with Japan, a deal with the Philippines, a deal with Indonesia. He's already got a deal that he's going to sort of try and finalize with the UK as he heads over to the UK tomorrow. So, he does appear to be in this moment wanting to sort of get to deals. But one thing that was sort of highlighted to me is that in this moment, Canada doesn't seem to be front and center for the Americans. Donald Trump seems to be really focusing on a number of countries that don't have those trade deals, the same one that Canada have. And some comments that Howard Lutnick made over the weekend sort of point to that as well. Canadians, businesses and workers that are dealing with the steel and aluminum tariffs, that are dealing with the auto sector tariffs, and might be working in an area that are not covered by some of those exemptions, the tariff exemptions, they are obviously having a very difficult time. time. But from the Trump administration perspective, they look at both Canada and Mexico and say, listen, there are some carve-outs here that other countries don't necessarily have. Yeah, there are those 25% tariffs that are related to border security and fentanyl, but there is an exemption for CUSMA-compliant goods or USMCA-compliant goods. So they see that there is still significant trade happening back and forth that is not affected by tariffs. And Donald Trump right now is dealing with countries that are going to be dealing with a much bigger shock come August 1st.
Right.
However, that is not very much comfort for Canadian workers, businesses that are trying to navigate all this, for people in the steel and aluminum industry that are dealing with 50% tariffs with no sign that those tariffs are going to budge at all. So again, I wish that it were like far more simple to explain or far less complicated. And I'm sure the people that are dealing with this, especially the workers and the business leaders and the political figures that are trying to deal with this, but it remains, again, complicated, complex, difficult, fluid, all those words.
Yeah, it's a remarkable thing, Katie. They wipe out thousands of jobs and tell Canada how good they got it. There you go. This is CBC's Katie Simpson in Washington. Okay, so is August 1st, is it a real deadline or is it really dead for an official timeline for a deal? Let's talk to the power panel about that. Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. And here with me, Stevie O'Brien is a former chief of staff to Liberal cabinet ministers, and Kate Harrison is a conservative political analyst. Shachi, August 1st, Donald Trump put that, well, it was always on the calendar, but he made us circle it on the calendar with his 35% tariff letter. In Huntsville this week, the Prime Minister, the Premiers, they aren't really feeling bound by it. I don't think our negotiators are, and who knows if America is. How do you view the state of play with that date coming?
Look, I was talking to a friend yesterday in Vancouver who was trying to get her condo redone and is talking about how the state of interior decorators in the summer in the city is all mañana. We're making incremental progress, but we'll get it done when we get it done. And maybe a slightly odd analogy, but one that I think is very apt for where we're at. There are so many different shifting priorities in play, on both sides of the border. And when you hear Ambassador Hillman talk about, we will get the deal when the deal is right, and that may look like one thing this week and something else next week and something else 3 weeks from now. I don't think anybody's taking those deadlines seriously, in part because the U.S. president hasn't taken those deadlines particularly seriously. So, when we ask Canadians, for example, what are your thoughts on all of this? I think they're much more focused on whatever they perceive to be the right deal, and different people have different views on what that should look like, rather than a deal by a deadline that, given that the setter of that deadline tends to take deadlines fairly arbitrarily.
Kate, I think of deadlines. I'm reminded of Douglas Adams wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I love deadlines. I love the whooshing noise they make as they go by. And it feels like with Donald Trump, that's kind of the world we're living in. Where do you think Canada is on these talks?
Yeah, well, there is a real pain associated with not meeting that deadline, particularly for auto workers and steel workers. We have more tariffs today than we did on election day. And so there is a real economic consequence to not meeting the deadline. The Prime Minister also has some risk here in having posed deadlines that have not been met. August 1st perhaps was a mutually agreed upon deadline that it seems parties are unlikely to meet.
Yeah.
So there is a risk for the Prime Minister here in having raised expectations for a deal. Again, he came in on this promise of being the right guy at the right time to get a deal done for Canada. The longer this goes, I think that the goodwill Canadians have extended to him in terms of trying to be able to get something done is going to wear thin, and we still have that pain of the tariffs as they exist today for some really key sectors of our economy.
Yeah, Stevie, I talked to Scott Moe about that yesterday. I'm going to say it's been a lot of premiers in the last couple of days. And I asked him, if he sees the unity, certainly at the first minister's table, fracturing apart if the trade deal doesn't get done. And he talked about that second component of the national agenda right now, fixing things internally, as being just as important in terms of holding everything together, because there is this sense that, Trump just keeps moving, and, so you can control what you can control.
No, I agree with that. I think Carney's going to be measured. If we are back at the polls in 18 or 24 months, he's going to be measured about what he was able to deliver at home, probably more than he's going to be measured against what he was able to achieve vis-a-vis the U.S. president and the tariffs. Not that won't be important, it is, but I think Canadians, premiers across the country recognize that there is a lot of volatility there that's outside of Carney's control, and that to date, at least, he's been steering the ship, fairly well, or they're willing to give him a lot more leeway to see where they're going to land it. But that is conditional on the building up defense, building the homes, and moving some of these national projects forward.
But Kate has a good point, right, about those specific sectors, right? Steel, Catherine Cobden sat there the day they announced the steel plan and said we were bleeding out. And it helps, it doesn't replace, right? And auto is in a very similar situation with people like Flavio Volpe warning the Stellantis plant in Windsor, the plant in Brampton. These could just go if these tariffs are not looked after soon.
So I think that they need to continue to work as hard as they can, and where it sounds like Ambassador Hillman and Minister LeBlanc are on continuing to get the best deal possible for Canada. But we need to look internally on what we can do inside Canada within our control to maybe support those workers or support those industries, whether that's a retooling into more of the defense industry, whether I know they're using the steel in more Canadian defense, building up defense. Maybe there's an auto worker transition into building, labs instead of cars. But I think so that looking at all of the options that we have control of internally, building up the Canadian economy while doing our best to strike the best deal with Washington.
I was just going to, the other risk here is that as other deals come to the fore, and there are 5 right now that the U.S. has established, the risk again for our government is dropping farther and farther down that list, particularly given the intensity of the trade relationship that exists. Now, those other agreements vary in terms of their complexity, and
15% is not a tariff.
Canada has a very unique arrangement with the United States, so fully acknowledge that. But if we start to see that list of 5 grow to a dozen or 2 dozen, and Canada is not nearer to the top of that list, I think Canadians will be wondering what the government has been busying themselves with.
Yeah, well, Shasha, I wonder about that because, people getting deals, but at 15% tariffs or 10% tariffs or 20% tariffs, who knows where it's going to go. I see it difficult that the first minister's table and industry would accept that, because at a 10%, 15% tariff rate, your auto sector's done. And I just wonder, where is the country, do you think, in terms of their understanding of this? I don't mean the complexities of it, but just the power dynamic that exists with this unpredictable president just sort of punishing all of his friends and allies with a trade war.
Well, it's interesting because Kate talks about, sliding confidence or the risk of ebbing confidence in the Carney government to get a deal done. And indeed, what does that deal look like? First of all, you've got a majority of Canadians who continue to say, 2/3 who say, we want to take a hard line in terms of our negotiations with the U.S. We're still ticked off, we're still pissed off, and we don't want to see concessions. And when you put the question of concessions or places where we could meet the Americans on some of their demands, on any number of those issues, whether it's supply management, whether it's on the auto and steel industry accepting higher tariffs, whether it's around softwood lumber or access to water rights or purchasing more from the U.S. on defense spending, whether it's technology or equipment, majorities, more than 50% in almost every case, are like, yeah, we don't think we want to do that. But the reality is, in a negotiation, indeed, if we want to get a deal done, and we have to get a deal done, some sort of deal, there are going to be big questions that the Prime Minister and the Premiers are going to have to answer to their various electorates. It's great that the Premiers are all getting along right now. Doug Ford is singing the praises of the Prime Minister. Everyone's getting along. Tim Houston is part of the Love-In. It's fantastic, except for when they then have to go home to their various respective provinces and say, look, this is the deal we got done. This is how we managed it. And was it enough for Canadians who were looking for some level of either a tightened kind of response to some of these concessions, or was it a matter of, hey, we did the best we could? So there's a lot in there right now. What I can tell you is, in terms of the way Canadians are facing confidence or lack of confidence towards a deal. They're split evenly on this issue, David. About half say, yeah, we have all the confidence in the Carney government to get the deal that we deem good to be done. The other half say, no, we don't have confidence. And it isn't all about Carney. It isn't all about Trump. A good section of it is about the level of volatility that is built into these negotiations and is built into the Trump White House. So some people say, hey, we're not confident. It doesn't have anything to do with a lack of confidence in Carney. It's more, well, Trump might chicken out, or Trump is he's so volatile that he'll change his mind. It doesn't matter how hard we try in this situation. So there is an understanding, in a sense, that we're over a cliff economically. We know the situation is going to be bad, but no one's actually hit surface yet. And that's that free fall that we're in right now, trying to figure out, well, how bad is really bad?
Yeah, as we heard from Francis Donald earlier in the show, the CUSMA carve-outs on the bulk of the economy is keeping Canada in relatively better shape, but those sectoral tariffs are extremely punishing. And, you know, Stevie, these tariffs are not Mark Carney's fault. Because he's Prime Minister, they are his problem. And as Katie was saying off the top of the show, Katie Simpson, the U.S. seems to see Canada and Mexico as different than everybody else. There's an urgency to get these things done with the other people because they see the CUSMA carve-outs as essentially, oh, things are okay with Canada, when obviously they are not. And as Francis Donald said, there's 5 months of inventory maybe in a lot of U.S. companies, and that means they may not feel the pain until the start of 2026, which is a tough spot for Canada.
It is a tough spot for Canada, but you're also right. Canada and Mexico are different in their relationship with the United States. It's not the relationship that Canada has is significantly different than the relationship Japan has with the United States. We're neighbors. We have so many more cross-border pieces. There are critical minerals. There's water. There's joint defense pieces that are. It's a much more complicated negotiation that has to take place, and things are, you know, at a higher. It's much higher stakes. So I think getting the right deal is at the end of the day the most important thing.
Right.
But you're right, getting attention when, you know, the U.S. The CUSMA is already there. There's kind of a holding pattern. The Americans are not feeling necessarily the pain. Is going to be a challenge when everyone else in the world is also trying to get Washington's attention.
Yeah, Kate, it's the uncertainty, it's the volatility, the unpredictability, but then there's also, if you are down the chain of items to get to and they're not feeling the economic pain yet because they've stockpiled their inventories, it's going to be tough for Canada to put the pressure on the U.S.
There is some volatility, but there are some constants that Trump has made clear around fentanyl. It is very clear, and the elephant in the room is that supply management is certainly on Trump's agenda, and Canada will be obviously very reluctant.
But that's for next year, I guess, right? For the review? Well,
yeah,
who knows? Who knows? It could be next month, right?
Part of the strategy, I think, of Canada is to not give too much until they hit those official negotiations.
Of course, yeah.
So there are things on Trump's agenda that he wants to see achieved, and then there are Canada's objectives, and there exists a very large delta between those two things at the moment.
That is a very, yes, that is very true. Okay, look, there are two tracks kind of happening right now. There is this Canada-U.S. Effort, and then there's getting things moving internally to sort of build resilience and just unlock economic productivity in this country. And in the Northwest Territories today, Prime Minister Mark Carney met with Inuit leadership, and this trip is part of his continued outreach to Indigenous groups over his law to fast-track major projects. But it seems that today's meetings have made some progress. Have a listen to this.
The Prime Minister and his cabinet ministers couldn't have been any clearer in their assurances to Inuit leadership about the upholding of the constitutionally protected agreements that we have with the Crown. I'm really optimistic about the ability for Canada to respect our agreements in this implementation phase of Bill C-5. But still, these are early days, and we look forward to the conversations ahead.
So, Shachi, there has been, to this point, sort of mixed responses from a lot of the national Indigenous groups, the AFN, with its 600-plus members. Obviously, it's going to be more difficult to pull together. But Natan Obed was very frustrated with the pace at which this legislation was pushed through. So this is an important development on reassuring key players.
Well, yeah, and especially the players who hold influence and the players who were very critical at the beginning of this process around C5. So, you know, I heard two things from Mr. Obed. I heard early days, but also feeling reassured, and it really speaks to a couple of questions, and we've laid out these questions before. Ultimately, when various Indigenous communities and First Nations speak against C5, the big question, as you've laid out, is, you know, who speaks for any community, because there is no monolith. But in the case of Mr. Obed, he is speaking for his people, and it represents perhaps a hurdle cleared. And you take your fences one at a time in these situations, but he also talked about the early days aspect of things, which means if he doesn't like the projects he's seeing that have an impact on his people, we are certainly back to the potential for having to, at best, negotiate, at worst, be in a very difficult situation around potential charter challenges and other criticisms or outright opposition. You know, for now, a slim majority of Canadians are on side with C5, including the provisions around consultation, but not necessarily a veto. Mr. Obed had interesting things to say about what does a veto represent. Is it necessarily a good thing or a bad thing? But I think this would be a moment of relief, a moment for Mark Carney to wipe his brow and say, phew, at least for today, this is a step forward without having to maybe worry about two more steps back.
Okay, we've got about 2.5 minutes left in the show, but Kate, I listened to what Natan Obed said. He is a very measured critic of things, so that is an important statement from him. But I also stack that on top of what the outgoing Premier of Nunavut, PJ Akiaguk, told me yesterday about how they have alignment and the projects they put forward for the North. They're Inuit-led, they're Inuit-endorsed. So if you're looking at northern development and economic opportunity for the Inuit, this is a very good sign for progress on shared economic development up there.
And the wrong takeaway from the criticism that has been laid out, which I think has been appropriate, is that First Nations and Inuit communities do not want to see projects advance. That's the wrong takeaway.
They want an equal seat at the table on it.
They want a seat at the table. They want to know that the actors that they're dealing with are acting transparently. I do wonder if there is no flexibility or adjustment when these projects come forward. And truthfully, I think until we have a tangible project that we are discussing within the purview of C5, we don't know how this is going to play out. But I do think that the move fast, break things mantra of the Prime Minister, the Liberal campaigning approach, might come up against a Liberal governing approach, which is much more complex and runs into more roadblocks and some of the barriers that exist. Because you had this initial pitch of C5, which is we're going to move fast, we're going to be able to circumvent previous challenges and barriers that have existed to infrastructure development. And now you have communities saying, well, there might not be such a big change on our side. So until there's a project that we're actively debating and discussing, we're not going to know if the government is actually meeting their commitment.
Stevie, 30 seconds to you.
What I hear from this and from coming out of the First Minister's meetings is that we might want to look at some of our first major projects being done in the Arctic. That might be where we see progress, and what a great place. It has economic development potential, but there's defense importance, strategic defense, Arctic bases, other dual-use potential projects to roll out, and it sounds like willing partners potentially all around. I agree that it will depend on the specific project, but I would look to see something Arctic specific in the budget.
Yeah, and I think that's where you could tick a lot of boxes in a place like Nunavut, in that it's Indigenous-led, it could get you to the minerals you need, and it could get you to things that help with your NATO spending. So a lot of it could come together, and the support from the ITK, very important there. Okay, we've got to say goodbye. Shachi Curl, Stevie O'Brien, Kate Harrison, thank you so much for being here.